I wish there was a more interesting way of saying that Happy Times and Places is a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, try to guess my special guest's favourite things about a particular Doctor Who story, but I'm not sure there is.
Hello Toby, as requested, here are 5 things that I like about Remembrance of the Daleks from 1988.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of Remembrance of the Daleks. It's episode like 200 and something or other of Happy Times and Places. I don't know which episode, and episode, goodness gracious, even less of an idea of Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, which is the umbrella title for all of these. But fortunately we can sort of take these as individual little snippets, story by story, whatever you like. There's no order, there's no season arc. If you fancy listening to me talking about a lovely old black and white, you can, and you can also hear me having a few more sort of personal angles on stories that were on when I was born, and this is one of them, Remembrance of the Daleks Part 2. It was also on when I was a self-loathing teenager who was very angry with Doctor Who because it wasn't the Doctor Who of the past. But now it is the Doctor Who of the past, and I thoroughly enjoy Remembrance of the Daleks. So let's see if I enjoy it this time. The person who's chosen it is Charles Norton, who is behind a lot of the great things on the Doctor Who DVD and Blu-ray range. He's a very nice chap, a very fastidious producer who knows lots of sort of little minutiae about how the BBC worked back in the day that he's sort of ferreted around and pulled out. And he's a good egg, is Charles, and I enjoy. I always know that when he's phoning me because for some reason he's either blocked his number from my phone or my phone doesn't like his number, and I don't get many spam calls. So if it's a number, if it's a number withheld or can't recognise the number, I bet it's Charles who's ringing me to talk about the closing credits of something or a font, and it usually is. And then we talk for about an hour. And it's always time well spent, and he's always full of ideas. He's always putting me forward for things, which is very nice. He had an idea for a BBC 4 series recently that they really liked the idea of, but said they wouldn't do it with me, but if he could get Mark Gatiss involved, they would. So that's just a little insight into even the obscurest channel. It was a really low-budget show as well. They still go, yeah, we won't give a break to that guy that we don't really know. You have to get somebody massively famous for it, who we'd probably have to really squeeze into our schedule because he's really busy and pay more. But we would rather do that on our niche channel than... Anyway, let's not get into that. Let's go back to a time when television wasn't run by bastards. I'm sure there were plenty of bastards making television in 1988, but they were bastards who had good reason not to want to employ me because I was 14. Right. Now, I was too young then. Now I'd be allowed to run the blooming channel age 14. Everything's run by a 14-year-old. So now I'm too blooming old. Oh, well, I am. I just got too old for Radio 2. Isn't that sad? When you suddenly realise that they're getting rid of the presenters you like because then they're replacing them with younger people. You suddenly go, I've only just got used to being old enough to listen to Radio 2. What's happening to me? So before I expire before your ears, let me age to death in front of something that I scorned when I was in my first flush of youth for reasons that were not its fault but were mine. And now hopefully I was going to say, now I'm relaxed and happy. No, now I'm just furious about other things. So, I'm not really. I mean, yeah, I'm not. I mean, I sort of am. I suppose I am in principle, but less in, I don't let it eat me up. There's no point. I'm pragmatic about such things, but I do give them side-eye. Whereas I'm going to give my orbs are going straight ahead to give full attention to Remembrance of the Daleks, Part 2, and I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. And here we go. So here we go. We have the longest title sequence known to man and beast. 4. If there was a slight dip there, it's because I told a certain robot lady to reduce the volume, and obviously, if I still think that's quite loud. Volume 3. There we go. I've reduced the volume, and hopefully I've remembered to dip the sound on those 2 bits so that you, when you're going about your business in your kitchen listening to this, if that's where you listen to it, haven't just made your own speaker turn down, which is actually a flaw in the system, and it's probably the first scene in the drama I'll write about such systems actually malfunctioning and destroying the world. Right, here we go. We're going to count now. Here we go. Michael Sheed kneeing Ace in the bollocks. And I want us to count now, because this is what I remember. I did actually do this once. Doctor, you are the enemy of the Daleks. You will be exterminated. 1. Exterminate. Exterminate. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 times. I may have been a little quick there because I was counting around. I'm sure I did it once when I was younger, and I said exterminate, and I thought it was about 13 times, but it's somewhere between 13 and 23 times. It says exterminate before actually shooting anything, and when it does shoot something, it shoots a door. But it's given not only time to get Michael Sheard out of the way, but to check that he's got a robotic device behind his ear, do a little bit of a quip, school dinners. I mean, it's all great fun stuff. But if you're a cross 14-year-old who thinks Doctor Who's not as good as it used to be, that's the sort of thing that makes you go, at a moment when the Dalek's climbing the stairs, which should be a moment where we go, yay, Brill! But anyway, well done for climbing the stairs. Well done for having Michael Sheard in it. I love Michael Sheard, one of the great character actors of those times, who, was just in everything. I had the pleasure of meeting him when he was releasing one of his many autobiographies. That's Derek Keller, who's died a couple of years ago, who was also an agent, I think. I've ordered to deliver the ATRs to this position. So, oh yes, and that's a nice little coda for the scene, because you think he's a character that's not actually done much, but he then leads us into reminding us of the spooky sort of gimlet-eyed sort of pathological Marmalade Atkins girl, Jasmine Breaks, who I think is terrific. I think Ace having a bazooka is just brilliant. So that's right. You tell them that they will be exterminated. Tell them again. But I love all of this stuff. I do like the individual little beam, and I like the fact that they've gone to the effort of putting a smudge mark on the school wall behind Ace, although from having played computer games that have bazookas, I think you'd die if that happened, wouldn't you? The backblast, backlash will blow back and kill everything. I think the backblast would have had a bit more power than that, but I don't care, that doesn't matter. Lots of blown up Daleks in Remembrance of the Daleks, which is a good thing. I like an exploding Dalek. It's got a great handle on the action adventure side of things, and I like the look of it as well. The sort of cleanness of the picture, and I don't know. It feels sort of fresh. But unlike the previous season was quite colourful, but it was also quite tatty. Everything here is a bit more sort of solid. It seems to me to be a more anchored kind of production. I've just shouted at the robot lady again because I actually couldn't hear anything. I turned her down too small. The robot lady is the is the thing that you voice activate. That I at this age, if you told me back in 1988 or one day I'll have voice-activated speakers. I think, well, that's going to be a world where everything's amazing, whereas, of course, it's a world where loads of things aren't amazing, and even the stuff that seems amazing compared to what we could do then comes with its own frustrations. So there we go. There's no pot of gold at the end of any technological rainbow. But it seemed quite fresh at the time that the 50s and the 60s were starting to be kind of nostalgia. Because if you think 1988, the 60s, it was only, 60s, this is the 25th anniversary, wasn't it? Which seemed old enough to sort of mark, but didn't seem. I don't know. Well, no, because the black and white stuff felt. I don't know. I think setting a story in the 60s and starting to look at that recent history seemed quite fresh and interesting. It was a bit like when we started to look at more modern or American drama in drama rather than the sort of classics. It seemed like we were starting to get grips with more sort of recent history, and that seemed sort of somehow fresh and a bit exciting. This scene is gorgeous, and I love Joe Marcel, who I've been very privileged to share a couple of drinks with, and indeed we did the unusual thing of we did our interview one week, and I remember we walked past Jay Rayner outside Leicester Square tube station. So Joe and I went for a drink and did the interview, and then I met him a couple of weeks later to buy him the lunch, which was the sort of payment for the interview. So we had two meetings, and we've exchanged the odd message since. Really interesting guy, and of course he's famous now for playing Geoffrey in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But he was doing National Theatre. I think, did he do Peer Gynt or something at the National? He was playing some good roles on the British stage, on the classical stage, and also on television. And then it was a joy to see him turn up in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and, be doing stuff in Hollywood. And it was kind of, Geoffrey from The Fresh Prince has been in Doctor Who. But it's a tiny scene, but it's beautiful. And it speaks to what this adventure is about. But it really suits Sylvester McCoy's sort of melancholy, brooding Doctor. And I like that idea that we consider, one small action. And an action that we don't think about, sugar, that actually had terrible ramifications for real people, and speaks to elements of race which are at the heart of this story. This is all great stuff. This is all intelligent scripting. This is all thoughtful. This is all it has a great humanity to it as well, and a lot of the subtext of this story will definitely be worth talking about in those terms, and that's also interestingly reflects on where we are today, where we have great cultural schisms and arguments about our past and our responsibilities and all those sorts of things, which I think is and to be doing it in this show at this time shows great ambition, I think, and great thought for something which was certainly hated by by a lot of its sort of senior management, and had no reason to really be pushing the boundaries in the way that it was. Not to say that there weren't other programs that did programs, tackling the issue of racism or that used a metaphor within their storytelling. But for Doctor Who to be doing it, I think is admirable and smart, and I think it works really well in this story. William Thomas here playing the Undertaker seems quite unremarkable at the time. He's a funny Welsh character actor playing a funny, apologetic, slightly hapless Undertaker, but of course becomes the first speaking actor, here he is, to cross the divide. It was probably on the cards because they used a lot of Welsh actors, particularly in that first series when Christopher Eccleston was Doctor Who. And quite rightly so. I very much approve of productions using actors local to the production, because actors get paid so badly and costs are cut everywhere. Well, if you can cut costs by not transporting people or putting them up in a hotel and using from the talent pool of the area that you're making the stuff in, then that's good on a practical level, but also on a moral level is too much. But on I think it's the right thing to be doing on more than just a practical level. He William Thomas gets killed in the opening, the pre-titles sequence of Boomtown, which makes him the first credited actor to appear in both old, classic, and new Doctor Who. Although I'm sure there will be a time in the future when they'll look back and there will be not a sliver of paper between them. This is actually a very reasonable CSO here, and they go to the trouble of putting in a shadow, which is very good. I remember not particularly enjoying this bit when it was on. I actually think it's quite charming now. People don't faint in things anymore. It was sort of shorthand for either shocked woman or hapless man facing something he couldn't quite cope with. Fainting has sort of lost its place in our cultural landscape, in us as a storytelling device. I'm not sure I miss it, but I think that's quite charming, and I like the way the Doctor kind of leaves, probably knowing that was going to happen. I've just talked through George Sewell, which seems awful because he's such a good actor. I remember when the cast list of this was revealed, it was wall to wall sort of favourite actors, and Peter Halliday, of course, I think we were told he was going to be playing the Reverend Parkinson or something. I think he's credited as Vicar. So this is a very, very small part for Peter Halliday, who was, I suppose, in that stage in his career where he was taking whatever was going. He did after this have some quite good. He's in a Jimmy McGovern series called Hearts and Minds with Christopher Eccleston, where he's credited at the front. But it's an actor's life, and I know he's only a soldier in City of Death, but I know that then he was doing Michael Hayes a favour, and Michael Hayes talked of he wouldn't have normally got an actor of that stature to play a soldier, but it was quite a funny part, and he needed somebody who'd hold their own against Tom Baker. So that wasn't Halliday doing a small part, but this is here Halliday doing a small part, playing the blind vicar. That reminds me, I'm doing a thing about disability in Doctor Who, and I didn't remember the blind vicar, so I will go back and rewrite that. I remember not believing that Mike was a baddie. I thought that was a bit of misdirection until, of course, now they make it blatant. But yeah, Peter Halliday, Packer from The Invasion, Pletrak from my trio of favourite characters ever in Doctor Who, the bureaucrat aliens in Carnival of Monsters. So you've got Halliday, you've got Sheard here, again, who turns out not to be long for this episode. And I love the little way he goes, no, because Sheard's great, isn't he? Because he does great villainy. And he's great at sort of cold, snarling villainy, but also he's got that sort of plaintive side that is so good when he's Lawrence Scarman in Pyramids of Mars. But here it was, you sort of got, this is Mr. Bronson, and again you sort of go, it's really obvious casting, isn't it, to go for the headmaster. Let's get the guy who's the really famous school teacher. But I remember thinking this was very neat that he dies, down by the bit that says "in loving memory," which is just a lovely little piece of attention to detail. And you go, oh, so that's right. That's the end. That's the end of Michael Sheard. This is all Peter Halliday does. So Reverend Parkinson turns out not to be much of a part at all. And of course, there's a reason that the Doctor gets the blind vicar is because it's really a floating coffin. That's a lovely shot. So that the blind vicar won't notice it's a space coffin, which is obviously easier than just getting 4 people to help you carry an actual coffin. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's fun, spacey stuff. Dursley McClendon is stunningly beautiful man. And yeah, that reveals that Mike is the bad guy, which is, a horrible twist. I like it when you see sort of Ace there with Rachel and Alison, because they already feel like they're sort of part of a team, that they've got a life outside the adventure, even though they've only just sort of met. There's something about people having breakfast in this scene that I just think is rather charming. One, breakfast I think is quite charming because it has toast racks and teapots and all of that, and people reading papers, which are all things that I sort of look on as sort of fondly held accoutrements of life. I remember really not liking the baseball bat. Odd how I was immune to that. I think I didn't like the funny noise. And I also was never a great fan of Ace's slang, which I found a bit like a woman being written for by men who've never touched a bra. Is that bad? But it did seem to me that yeah. But anyway, that's no disrespect to Sophie Aldred, who attacks it all with gusto, which is the only thing you can do. You can't apologise for it. But I do find Ace's vernacular somewhat toe curling. I mean, I don't really care now, but I did at the time, and of course I was very sensitive. And I wanted it to, I wanted Doctor Who to be gritty and amazing. Whereas actually, of course, part of Doctor Who's charm is that it's got a sort of daft verve about it. And I'm not a woman. I didn't need a female identification figure. I probably wasn't, slightly fed up with often the passivity of female characters on television at that time. And to look at those elements of Ace rather than, what I don't like about her phraseology is a much more positive way of appreciating the many boons to that character. I remember not quite understanding this. Because I was quite young. I wasn't. It took me a while to pick up what they were driving at. I thought maybe they were going for a kind of a General Carrington type of villain. Somebody who was slightly misunderstood, because they had to be quite coy about it as well. Bear in mind, I was 14. And it took me a while to pick up and go, oh, God, no, they're fascists. Oh, okay. But, I mean, I think that's a really hard thing, because you can be, fascism and extreme racism are... You can't deal with those things lazily either, or it's cheap and it's glib, and I think it's irresponsible. And I think this... Bearing in mind, this is a program watched by a lot of kids, although it's not at tea time now. It's in the week and on opposite Coronation Street. I actually think it judges the way it deals with that. This whole aspect of the story. I think particularly in making Mike the chiseled, beautiful, almost Aryan, but hero, the guy who would be the romantic lead in anything else, as the factotum of the Oswald Mosley type figure, is very, very clever, and I think quite advanced, and I think quite chilling. McCoy's got a brilliant face. And I think he really works well within the military setting. And I think Rachel and Alison are great characters because they act as a sort of conduit between him and Gilmore, who probably in reality would kick him out on his arse, and then he'd probably tumble, stick that arse in the air, and go yoink. But that's Sylvester McCoy's Doctor. There's so much of this I like. Again, this is that could perhaps not work were it not a confluence of real quality everywhere. So, and the story here, of course, when Ace reads the no coloured sign, I mean, even the word coloured, is so archaic. It was archaic then in the 80s. I think nobody used that sort of phraseology. But the fact that she has it, and the fact that it's the sort of nice old lady in the guest house who's been looking after them, who makes them tea and toast. But lots of nice people who do nice things also have views that are sort of terrifying when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, and also were times that we look at nostalgically come at a price, but that comes with a warning as well, of course, that never be too self-satisfied, because there are things that we do and think now that in 20 years' time we'll look back and go, do we really do and think those things? Anyway, this is a subject I've covered many times before. I really think it's very cleverly, especially as it's a story about Daleks, who are the ultimate in racial supremacy and dislike of the unlike. To set it in the lovely old time when Doctor Who first started, and to highlight that element of what humanity does to itself. You're not so different to the Daleks, guys. And also to do it in a scene where you then go and have the close-up of the telly and go, now on BBC One, it's time for the new science fiction series. And the light goes out. And I've seen sort of books sort of go, well, this is obviously set in the summer because of the because it's not dark outside, so it's obviously something else. Well, I hate it when people spoil fun like that. It's clearly meant to be is this Doctor Who? This is clearly meant to be November 1963, and it's tantalising us. And the fact that it's light outside is because it wasn't filmed in November 1963, and there was no way that they'd ever have the resources to make it like that, and it wasn't so important to make it like that, and you just have to sort of go with it. But the intention is that this is November 1963. I'm sorry. And I accept it as being that, even though it should be dark outside. It's one of those curious, slightly slowed down pieces of VT, which you would occasionally get. They occasionally press the pause button as well when I think something hasn't been picked up particularly well, and that curiously dates something. I mean, there's loads of it in other shows. You look at stuff that seemed quite advanced at the time, like If We Design Pet or things like that, where they press you have the pause button, or some really VT lighting that's really quite grotty. And this, I mean, I think the quality, the picture quality, love that Dalek shooting into the screen. Was that on a trailer? I think it was. I used to record all the trailers. I've got them on the end of some VHSs. I noticed Rachel and Alison have both got cardigans on. I'm getting to the age where not only is Radio 2 too old for me, but I now very much look forward to something wrapped up and squashy, and the idea that it might be a cardigan. And 5 years ago, I would have any cardigan you gave me, I would have burnt on a pyre. That's a beautifully Doctor Who-y lash up as well. I like any piece of sort of Doctor Who equipment that's got the sort of Heath Robinson element to it. They've got no word from the school. It goes at a lick of a pace, this, and that Dalek going up the stairs is very well done. I mean, it's a little slow, but it's not wobbly. It looks quite solid. I think Kev McCulloch's funky music works here. I think Andrew Morgan shoots the Daleks for all this action stuff very nicely. I'm not wild about the gold and white, but actually, that said, when it came through the doors there, I thought it looked brilliant. This is brilliantly done. This whole sequence is excellent. All this fire and the glass and this is extraordinary. This is the last story we'd seen was Dragonfire, for goodness sake, which production-wise, this is like a different show, and the timing of that action sequence was great. Sophie Aldred is so good at all of this action stuff. She's so sort of gung-ho and enthusiastic, and she's got all of that nailed. I love her, and this is really action-packed, and I love it. And I think everything, the music, the shooting of it. And now the Daleks are going to say exterminate how many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So maybe that was the one where it's 13 times. But you get my picture. You hear what I'm saying. Oh, Ace has to share a caption there with Group Captain Gilmore, because this is such a big guest cast. Joseph Marcel, William Thomas. I mean, these are all fantastic actors. So much in that episode of Doctor Who. I mean, even the Dalek voices are 4 legends. Roy Skelton, voice legend, and Rainbow, of course, as well as all of his Doctor Who stuffs. Royce Mills was a fine actor and a great panto dame. Brian Miller, husband of Elizabeth Sladen, but also a fine theatre actor whose telecareer stretches right up to today with things like Line of Duty. Modern great shows, and of course the Doctor Who spin-offs that he's done, and he's been in Doctor Who as well, in Snake Dance. And then John Leeson, the legendary John Leeson, K9, who's voicing the motorcycle helmet creature of doom. So there we go. I really like that. And this was from an era of Doctor Who I was so cross with as a youngster. I mean, I still tuned in every week. I still made sure I videoed it and that my video button, my video finger paused and unpaused at exactly the correct time. And I still watched it, 3 or 4 times in the week between episodes. But I was always on the lookout for things that I didn't like or that would worry me or that would... not work for the general public, or that were continuity issues. I'm so pleased I am not that uptight anymore. I'm so pleased I can just watch this and enjoy it for its merits, which are legion. There's so much in that I could choose. I mean, the cast on paper. I remember the cast on paper being exciting, and I actually think sometimes in-joke casting or nodding casting can sometimes sell a show a little bit short. You sort of go, you don't need to do that, but actually here, I think it really was, and I don't think it was a policy. I think they were just getting actors who were around. But Michael Sheard and Peter Halliday both turning up in this 25th anniversary when they're actors that have done great service to the show in the past. I thought was a lovely little touch, even though, as I say, I don't think it was a policy. I don't think they were going, let's get those guys who've been in Doctor Who, good 4 or 5 times each. But having them, it just lifts the whole thing, especially as they're playing quite small parts. Now, of course, the actor in me sort of goes, oh, they're underused. I feel a bit sorry for them. But they don't need my pity. They have fantastic careers, and I'm sure we're very happy. But part of me goes, no, if you're getting them if you're getting an actor, I want them to be being the main part. But of course, now you just go, well, having such good actors in the smaller parts really lifts the whole thing. And I'd add, the actors that hadn't been in Doctor Who before, Joe Marcel and William Thomas, who are both fine actors. Again, it's what British movies used to do. You'd get Victor Madden or Michael Balfour in for a scene, and they'd lift that scene. And that's I think we've always been lucky with our actors, and Doctor Who has been particularly lucky with its actors, because most of the parts are kind of worth turning up for, really, even if they're only a little bit. So delightful to see those guys. I think the show deciding to tackle racism, I know that there's a certain temptation to look back and go, well, it's a bit naive and sort of A-level drama-y groupy for Doctor Who to be taking on nuclear war and racism and all the things that an A-level drama student would want to be doing. But actually, that's us. Being lofty about the sort of sophistication of storytelling and audience expectation that we do now, and it's and that's not to say people then weren't sophisticated, but what I'm saying is that a lot of television was just about getting made or telling a very simple, straightforward story. I think any telly now actually that uses metaphor or subtext, it's hard to make an adventure. It's hard to make any sort of story make any sense with a beginning and a middle and an end and characters that are interesting, and let alone one with the technical complexities of Doctor Who. But when you have the ambition to do something else with it, and also what I like about it is it's not doing it in a didactic way. It's just using it as a very thoughtful sort of subtext. And actually that scene with Sylvester and Joseph Marcel has a sort of sadness to it and a sort of philosophical bent to it, rather than, because I have to say a lot of modern iterations of storytelling with a point. Well, no, I'm perhaps thinking of discourse rather than storytelling. There's a sort of didacticism about the way that I think we conduct ourselves sometimes today, as if we think everybody else is as if there's an assumption that everybody else is stupid, and that I think is as much problematic as problematic as anything else. And also, yes, I think it is easy to go, they're doing racism, but I think they do it in quite a thoughtful and impressive way, and I'm sort of proud of my show that on a 7:30 opposite Coronation Street, there's this show about twatting Daleks with a baseball bat that's decided to throw in something that's thoughtful and interesting and speaks to the time it's resurrecting, and also speaking to the time that was, that was the concerns of the day, and actually, of course, concerns that we still have today, although they manifest themselves in different ways. I think it's a legitimate thing to do, and a thing that it does very well within what is also a very well mounted, action-packed Doctor Who story that moves at a lick. The pacing of it is excellent. The setting of it is very well rendered. Yeah, you can't do the early dark nights of November in the 60s. And if you want it to be set in April, that's fine. It's November for me. But that also has its Doctor Who sort of looking at its own history, because it's 25-year anniversary. I actually don't mind that in this circumstance, whereas I think it does get too much in certain places, and the show can get a bit too self-referential for its own good. I don't think that is the case in Remembrance of the Daleks, where I think that's part of the remit, and I think the little now time for TV program Doctor Who, I think is delightful, and just enough to make you go oh, and to allow it to be what you want it to be. So I think it's a terrific episode of Doctor Who. It's great fun, very well done, very well written, very well made. Even though the Daleks say exterminate too many times. But what's my favourite thing? I think the scene with the sugar is one of the great Doctor Who scenes. So maybe do I choose that, or do I choose that and the wider thing of going, because that's not a scene in isolation. That is a scene in a story that has chosen to look at its central villains and go, what is it about these guys? And the Daleks have have parallels with the Nazis, and that was part of their inspiration, and has also been part of their depiction to a lesser or greater extent. Certainly in Dalek Invasion of Earth, and definitely in Genesis of the Daleks. But their ideology is a sort of fascistic racial purification, sort of Nazi kind of ideology. And actually, that's quite hard to do, because again, you don't want to seem to cheapen reality, because actual Nazis did terrible things that we can barely contemplate, and by God, we're lucky to have not had to endure it, and yet people within our lifetime did, and very, palpably, and and witnessed and underwent things that, my goodness, you don't know how you would cope, and so you have to be careful not to cheapen that by making glib parallels. But actually, I think the parallels are used very intelligently and artfully, and so I think my favourite thing of episode 2, which speaks to the whole story, but I think it comes out in the sign in the window, which of course famously Andrew Cartmel says that he was very proud of that scene, and rightly so. And the head of drama had his eye on something else when they were showing him the episode, and he did that unprecedented thing of going, excuse me, I really want you to watch this scene. I mean, good for Andrew. I have to say, good for Andrew, and good for him for wanting Doctor Who to do this sort of stuff, but good for him particularly in saying, no, I'm going to rewind this and I want you to watch it, boss. And his boss watched it, and of course, nobody is wholly good and wholly bad, and the boss who'd ignored it went, yeah, okay, but she should have shown her disgust and torn it up. And you go, okay, yeah, that's why it's always useful having another eye. A bit too late, thanks, boss. I'm never a great fan of, did you not think to do that? It's like, sometimes no, when you're in the whole whirligig of doing a thing, suddenly you take a step back and go, oh yeah, why didn't we think of that? Well, because our minds were on 15 different things. But still, it's an interesting observation, and I think a fair alternative suggestion to go, well, Ace should have been so disgusted by that she tore it up. But also, you don't know. I've probably been in situations where I wish I'd said something, where somebody said something that I found a bit offensive, or that where I could have been in a position to, to make a scene, if you like, in order to point out the egregiousness of what somebody said. But she's in somebody else's house, for starters. She's not in her own time. You love to think you would do something forceful, or you would do the right thing, but often, embarrassment, my God, is... I think somebody needs to do a drama one day about how just being embarrassed stops us from doing all sorts of things. I mean, I think sometimes I've probably failed to go to something with the doctors that I've thought might be really serious because I'd be embarrassed if it was wrong. I'm more frightened of being embarrassed that I've gone without a fatal disease to the doctor than I am worried about having a fatal disease. And it's like, well, when push comes to shove, I'd rather not embarrass myself than avoid an early death, if I'm right. So, I think Ace's reticence to tear the sign up, or confront Mrs. Smith, who is Kathleen Bidmead, who gets a credit on Doctor Who in episode 1 of Survival and had been part of the production team, but is uncredited as Mrs. Smith, because she only has a couple of, I suspect, non-scripted couple of lines there. But Ace doesn't do that. I think that's an interesting anecdote. I think it speaks to a lot of how the show was at the time, but also, I quite like the fact that the Cartmel's boss is not entirely villainous, because he does come up with actually quite a sensible and useful alternative suggestion. So anyway, I love the scene in the cafe, that beautiful set at night, which gives it an atmosphere. But I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to let it ripple outwards and affect the whole of this choice that permeates the whole episode, and indeed the whole story, is the fact that the writer and the production have decided to address in a clever and thoughtful and not didactic way the idea of the racism inherent in our own society in a story about the ultimate space racists, and it does it. I think it's so full of potential pitfalls to do that, and I actually think it does it really, really well. So bravo, everybody, and that's what I've chosen. What's Charles Norton, Blu-ray producer extraordinaire, chosen?
Okay, so thing number 2, and this is probably quite a predictable thing. I think it's a thing that a lot of people choose when they talk about Remembrance of the Daleks. And it's from episode 2, and it's the scene in the cafe in which the Doctor talks to the cafe owner about, well, effectively the price of sugar. And it's just such a perfectly balanced scene. Not just in terms of the content of the scene, which is it's a very well written little dialogue piece, charged full of meaning and circling around the sort of themes and motifs of the story, doing so very well, but also in terms of the basic structure of how the scene is actually played out and its context in the episode. Remembrance of the Daleks is very much an action-adventure kind of story. It's one of the more sort of adrenaline-charged stories of the Sylvester McCoy era, and it's probably most successful because of that. However, it also recognises the importance in any good action-adventure story of balance. You can't just have set piece after set piece after set piece, things going bang every 3 minutes, without any sense of balance. And what this scene in the cafe is the balance. It's the juxtaposition. It's a point where the viewer, the audience, can reflect upon the themes and the ideas behind things and sort of basically calm down So the sort of the position of that cafe scene in the episode is quite important. It fulfills a really important structural function in the shape of the episode. And the episode itself wouldn't work, and the exciting set pieces within it would not work as well without that little scene there in the middle. The other thing I really love about it is the way it's shot. There's if you actually sit down and watch it, there are only 2 camera setups in that scene. I suspect it was probably just done in one take with 2 cameras covering it. You start out with the Doctor coming in through the door, and the camera follows him over to the bar at the countertop at the where you go to get your tea, and then the camera settles into a 2-shot of the Doctor and the cafe owner talking with the bar in the middle, with the countertop in the middle. There's a lot of it's in profile. In fact, the only reason for the second camera setup, which is a close-up of Sylvester McCoy, is the fact that otherwise you'd be looking at the back of his head all the time, and there's 1 or 2 moments where you sort of want to look at his face. But for the majority of the scene, it's just playing out as that 2-shot, and rather than sort of giving into the temptation of cutting from a 1-shot of the cafe owner back to a 1-shot of the Doctor, trying to take in and focus the viewer's attention on the facial expression of any one character as they're saying any one line. Instead, the scene sort of focuses on the distance between them and the relationship between them, and it's much better shape to it, much better balance to that scene. As a consequence, you are focusing on the conversation, the dialogue between them, rather than just on what one character's saying. The cafe owner doesn't really end up actually saying very much, but because of the way it's shot, you take in his input into the conversation far more than you would do if you were just constantly focusing on the Doctor in a close-up. The simplicity of that communicates the conversation so much more effectively than it would if you'd done the whole thing in a series of tight close-ups, cutting from the Doctor coming in and cutting from the door handle opening and the Doctor sitting down. But Andrew Morgan doesn't. He just keeps it focused on the moment between them.
Oh, Charles is a very good guest, isn't he? That was very articulate. And also, I like the fact that he talked only not just on the content of the scene and the ideology behind the scene, but also its sort of place in the mechanics of the storytelling, but also then the mechanics of the television, the televisual part of the storytelling, and the direction and staging of it. So what an interesting journey we went on from his choice and how it sort of worked in various different areas. Thanks, Charles, that was really good. And I mean I'm with him on all of that, and I think I also think I rather like the fact that at the end, instead of Joe Marcel's character being sort of, oh yes, and isn't it awful, he does that very thing which actually people do, and resilience is all about. He goes, life's like that, you just got to get on with it, and I think that's a much more real reaction to that beautiful philosophical point about ripples and us being affected by history and the tides of history and unfairness and all of that sort of thing. And he does the reason humanity prospers is because we get on with it. We just get on with it, and you have to in the end. And I like that reaction. It just seemed a bit more real and a bit earthy, and makes him less of a sort of saintly suffering figure, which I think would have seemed a little bit mawkish and slightly misjudged. I quite like the fact that he's this guy who works in a cafe rather than this sort of mythical figure of suffrage. It's a lovely scene. Also, kudos to Joe Marcel, because when I spent some time with him, we went for a drink and we went to get something to eat, and he's recognised by a lot of people. And every time somebody said, I remember we were sitting when we were in the restaurant, and they said, we'll be able to get a picture, and he sort of said, well, wait till the end, and that would be nice. But every time they sort of focused on him, he said, yes, and this is my friend Toby, and this is me, and he must do that with everybody that he's with. But he made sure. I mean, it's a double-edged point. It's one, not making the person you're with feel awkward, so I didn't feel awkward because he was including me in everything. But also, it's a sort of tacit suggestion to the people that are swarming to go, look, hang on, there is demarcation here, and also. I'm not the only important person in this. Everybody's important, and blah blah blah. And just making sure that you should treat everybody the same, even though I'm the target of your interest, because he's the guy that's been in a world famous television program. It was classy, I thought, and I did like being with him. I'm tickled by the fact. I actually got a round of applause because I was doing some stand-up, and I can't remember. I was doing something about life being awful or whatever, and I said, but actually, next week I'm going for lunch with Geoffrey from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And everybody gave me a round of applause. And I love the fact that because of this stupid Doctor Who show, one, that Geoffrey from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was in my favourite show before he was Geoffrey from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But then decades later, because of various different accidents of circumstance. And in fact, I got him because he was in a play with Amanda Boxer, who hasn't been in Doctor Who, but is a fine actress. And I only knew Amanda because I'd been to see her. I had email exchanges with her because she was an old flame of Bernard Kay, who was an actor from Doctor Who I knew. And she'd not been able to go to his funeral, so I'd just sort of kept in touch with her to keep her abreast of things. And we eventually ended up meeting up just because... we'd back and forth, because I think she realised I was an actor. And I'd asked her some questions about Andre Morel, because funny enough, I'd then been to Jason Morel, Andre Morel's son's house. And he said, my friend Amanda Boxer worked with my dad, and she had stories about him. So I'd emailed her and gone, I'm the guy you were emailing when Bernard Kay died. And we was, I'd still got and I knew she was an actress, and of course I did. And I think anyway, whatever. But it was another one of those funny coincidences. It was somebody had thrown a stone in the pond, and the ripple from Bernard Kay's death had been that I was sort of in touch with this woman. And then, another ripple that was Andre Morel's son. So I'd asked her about Andre Morel, and I got some good stories from her about Andre Morel. And then, she was appearing in... I'd seen Joe Marcel was appearing in a play. In fact, I'd seen he was doing something at at the Globe, when I'd gone to interview Sam Cox, who's Inspector Bishop in The Idiot's Lantern. And I'd noticed, I think he might have been working with Joe. And I'd sort of regretted not saying, no, that's right. I'd interviewed Sam already, and I was interviewing Joe. This is a series of... I'm not name dropping here. I'm just trying to sort of show how everything sort of weaves together. This is not me thinking I'm being cool or existing in some sort of rarefied social circle. I'm aware it's very much quite tenuous Doctor Who names, but I love the way all of this stuff sort of combines together, and I particularly love the fact that I'm somehow a sort of strange little part of it, because I'm a boy from the countryside in the middle of nowhere, and the fact that I would be having tea with a dominator or whatever just thrills me, because I felt like a drop in the ocean. I felt that, if you'd thrown me into a pond, I wouldn't have made any ripples whatsoever. But I was at the Globe because I was interviewing Giles Block, who's in The Dominators, who was master of verse at the Globe and also a director of Shakespeare at the Globe. And coming in to rehearse, I saw Sam Cox, who I'd interviewed when he was here at the Royal Exchange. So I sort of know Sam, but he was amongst a group of people. I think just going into rehearsal, I thought, well, I won't bother him, because you don't want to go up and go, I'm that Doctor Who guy that interviewed you a year or so ago. But then I noticed that Sam was in the play with Joe Marcel, and I thought, if I'd said something, I could have maybe... I think it was Cymbeline, and Joe was playing Cymbeline. If I'd said to Sam could have fixed me up with Joe, but I didn't feel confident enough to do it. But then a while later, I saw that Amanda was in a play with Joe, and I thought, well, that's twice that's happened, and I feel a bit more comfortable about emailing Amanda, because we've backed and forth, and I think when you sort of bonded about somebody who's died, you know, there's a few sort of barriers that are cut down a bit, and you're quite honest with each other. And she'd said some honest things about a play that she was in, you know, in a way that, you know, I think sometimes I don't know, there are fewer barriers or whatever. So I just felt confident enough to say to her, I don't suppose you could just have a word with Joseph Marcel, who you're in a play with, and I do this interviewee thing. And she did, and he phoned me, and that's how I ended up interviewing Joe. So there we go. I've gone from Inspector Bishop to, well, I suppose I've gone from Inspector Crossland in The Faceless Ones to Inspector Bishop in The Idiot's Lantern to Teal from The Dominators to John from Remembrance of the Daleks. Those are the kind of Doctor Who ripples that you know, affect one thing that affects another that affects another. Obviously, in a much more benign way than sugar causing slavery, which I think is such a great that piece of observation about that little decision. You know, and of course, a sugar lump makes a little ripple in the cup when you plop it in, but then to take that to mean the ripples of sort of cause and effect, I think is a smart piece of writing, beautifully portrayed by Sylvester McCoy, who's at his best, I think, when he's having those quiet, contemplative moments, and he's with a lovely Joseph Marcel, who's also got the bonus of then goes on to be really famous, who then, for the purposes of this, has the bonus that he was kind enough to submit to an interrogation from me, and he's a really nice guy. And I love the fact that I've you know, it's easy to feel small and unimportant, and I do, but I like the fact that I've as a kid from the middle of nowhere with no family who are involved in the entertainment industry at all, the fact that I've become this kind of Forrest Gump of Doctor Who, whereby I sort of pop up behind important people and events and somehow touch them without ever actually achieving any importance myself. So life is like a box of chocolates, you know, which are made out of sugar, which of course led to slavery, which is where we began from. So I get a point, is the outcome of all of that, because Charles and I were simpatico, and so it's 1-1 as we reach the halfway point of this splendid Doctor Who story, Remembrance of the Daleks, which just goes to show that you know, things from the past are not always what they seem, because when I watched this at the time, I was convinced there were all sorts of things wrong with this. Even then I knew it was. I couldn't ignore the fact that it was an excellent production and a real step up from what had gone before, just in terms of the show really sort of sorting itself out in terms of, you know, realising what it could pull off with its resources. It has gone through a bit of a renaissance between 24 and 25, but it really feels like a sort of fresh and confident show, and I knew, and at the time, being a Doctor Who fan, you knew it was in the doldrums of popularity, you know, with the public and with the BBC. So seeing it being so sort of bold and ambitious and well made, confident, it feels confident, which is great. Good for Doctor Who. Well done, Doctor Who. Well done, Remembrance of the Daleks. My 14-year-old self was an idiot. My 49-year-old self is an idiot, but at least he knows it. No, I knew I was an idiot when I was 14. Let's not rewrite the past. Let's look on the past. Actually, hang on. I withdraw that. My 14-year-old self was okay. I'm not going to look back and have a go at him for stuff that he didn't know, because that is a malaise of our times now, where we tend to look back and patronise the past because we think we know better, whereas, of course, the future will make fools of us all. But what's making a fool of me now is my inability to come up with a suitably pithy bon mot with which to end this episode, so I'm just going to do that right now and ask you to join me next time on Happy Times and Places. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Charles Norton, who is far too sensible to be on any form of social media. I'm grateful to Charles and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Joel Aarons, Joanna Abbott, Keith Adams, Mark Aldridge, Kit Allen, Neil Allen, Jonathan Appleton, Sebastian April, Tilt Ariza, Reddit Ariza, Simon Ash, Richard Alt, Richard Baker, Stephen Bamford, Simon Barker, Ollie Barrett, Andy Benison, Richard Bignell, Peter Blackett, Robin Bland, Gareth Bowley, David Brody, Hugh Buchtman, Tim Burrows, DC, Paul Carrington, Anthony Carroll, Damien Cartin, Phil Chapman, Ralph Chilton, Susan Christian, Steve Churchill, Kevin Clark, Mark Clues, and Graham Cluley. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Do you want to be in there, gang? Actually, God, why did I say that? Especially as the news this week is... Well, let's not get into that. Do you want your name read out on the credits? God, my... Is that a Pedian slip? Anyway, would you like your name read out on the credits? Don't try and think of interesting ways to say things, Toby. Gets you into trouble. Would you like to be on the list of people listed on the credits of these podcasts? And if you would like to be, you can pay £3 a month. And your name gets read out. Your name gets read out more often if you pay more than £3 a month, because there is a tiered system. However, the really important stuff, the content, that's a horrible word. The verbiage, the diarrhea in word form, the word salad that has been digested, gone through some awful process. I don't like where this is taking me. If you like this and you can afford to pay a little bit towards its upkeep, then please go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. For as little as £3 a month, you get your name read out on the credits, you get bonus material, advance releases, and probably some sort of apology for all those things I've just said. Should I go back and re-record them? I don't know. I think to err is human, and that's what makes us different from the Daleks. So in a way, this is a celebration of the humanity that makes us so special and awful at things sometimes, which I am and just have been. And I mean, I am whether you've paid or not. So you may as well, at least this way, you get to... No, you don't. You don't get to... No, if you'd paid for this, it would be no different. Except you'd just probably think you'd wasted your money. This is not a good advertisement, is it? Patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. You can also do Ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke, which doesn't get you the monthly commitment or any of the advance releases or bonus materials or exclusives, but it does mean you can contribute towards the fund that my family are probably going to use to send me to Switzerland far earlier than I need to go in terms of my physical health, but it would probably be... Now I'm talking about euthanasia. I think I've done better end credits bits than this, and there's still a couple of sections to go, so let's hope I don't make them any worse. I run a comedy club called Excess Malarkey, which takes place in Manchester at 8 p.m. every Tuesday. It's on Twitter at Excess Malarkey, XS, there's an X, there's an S, then Malarkey, M-A-L-A-R-K-E-Y. You thought I'd know how to spell it by now, and it's also online. I'd find it, Google it, Excess Malarkey, the letter X, the letter S, M-A-L-A-R-K-E-Y. It's good fun. It's, as I'm recording this, it's won 2 awards in the past 3 or 4 weeks and has just moved venue to a fantastic new place. So it feels like the beginning of a new era. It feels like a relaunch. It feels like a freshly minted remembrance of the Daleks after the season 24 that we spent at our old place, which was a bit tatty and time has not been very kind to. So come to that if you like stand-up comedy, which has got lots of good people. It's nice. It's a safe space. It's good fun. come along to that if you're passing through Manchester. I'd very much like it if you could. Listen, do you want to know a secret? Now that's in Remembrance, isn't it? On the jukebox, but I don't know if it's on the version I watched because I had the sound down a little bit. It's certainly on the original, isn't it? But didn't they have to replace some of the music? Anyway, some people know that, and that's in things that are all absolutely factual. It'll be in Too Much Information in 130 years' time. But anyway, I'm invoking that song, but to say, listen, do you want to know a secret? Because I don't know if you noticed anything about. I mean, it's been a sequence of disasters. This particular episode of this podcast. Especially with all the things I've just said out loud. I can't believe I haven't gone back to edit. I think if what happens after the closing music stays after the closing music, and if you've stayed that long, I think you know what you've signed up for. But did you notice anything different about the sound quality of that episode? Well, I mean, one, there's a dripping tap, but I don't think you pick it up from here. I hope not. It's kind of like a little sort of pin-sized drill bit in the back of my skull. But I'm soldiering on through. I'm a professional. I've tried to mend it myself. It's beyond my ken. So I've texted the plumber and gone, can you come mend a dripping tap? It's probably going to cost me, the call-out fee alone will swamp the price of the probably washer. But I've had a look. I've had a bash myself. Anyway, I don't think you'll have heard the dripping tap. However, having put the recording of, my commentary to episode 2 to bed, I then noticed something I've been forgetting to do, which I'm trying to get better at, because one should look after one's equipment, is there's a little sort of sock thing that you put over the microphone to protect it from, dust, entropy. Shirley Houston, who crashes into things and knocks things off and breaks things, although the sock wouldn't protect it from being knocked off anything. I just thought I'd get the dig in there for the fact that I live with somebody who destroys everything. God, sorry. But she really does, and she loses headphones and chargers. But that's a separate issue. That's just carelessness, wanton selfishness, actually, and carelessness. Whereas the destruction is some sort of klutzy, psychopathic tank business. Anyway, the point is, through the whole of that recording, I'd left that sock thing on, the little cover. For episode 2, so I don't know if it made any. Did it sound like I was wearing a balaclava, or did it sound like the microphone had got a sock on it? If not, what the hell have I been doing all my life, recording without a sock on? But that one is this is the sock episode of Happy Times and Places. It's taken till this one to have an episode with a sock on the microphone. I mean, I assume we put those spongy things on, and that doesn't do them any harm, does it? But yeah, well, this one, no sponge, lots of sock. So happy sock day. Happy times and socks. Happy times and socks. There we go.